So as much as I would love to buy an XPAN, and that would be like the coolest thing in the world, I'm sure it doesn't quite live up to my expectations. But more likely, the bigger reason is because they're expensive as heck and they're all a ticking time bomb. So speaking of ticking time bombs, I'm gonna use the camera I already have because I already have it, and therefore use it to make panoramas. And that would be the Mamiya 6 MF multi-format using the Panorama kit. So I've had this now for a couple of years, and this has been a really fun creative tool that has allowed me to make panoramic photos in ways that I really just couldn't do otherwise. I've taken it on a road trip to California. I've done sunrise sessions with couples in the mountains. I've done regular weddings. I've done just like life stuff here in the city, and there's just a lot of cool ways that I've been able to use this. But last winter, I was driving on my way to an elopement in Leavenworth, Washington, and then the next day, another elopement at Salish Lodge, which is kind of like back here on the west side. So I knew I had kind of this big long loop, and I wasn't planning on using this camera at the weddings themselves, just because this camera is not, it doesn't like being in the cold very much. So you can take it out, like out of the car, take a picture, put it back in, it'll be fine. But it doesn't really like staying outside for too long, so therefore it just wasn't the right one to be bringing to use for work at these weddings. I thought I'd lean into the panoramic format because I knew I'd be up in the mountains and stuff, and so the big width would work really well. So before I dive into the technical aspects of actually using this thing, let's relive that trip.
You call me a flight risk, try to close my eyelids and let the sound of water fill me from the bottoms up with the sun down. Take a quick look around, I don't recognize your eyes, but I know this. Place me on a pedestal, sex, drugs, rock and roll. I've been trying to climb my way to the top of your heartbeat slowly, hardly even know me, but you hold me closer than a mother with a baby.
This one coming up here is probably one of my favorite panoramic photos I've ever made. I just love the way that the light was falling on the mountains mixed with the icy river right below it.
We all know just how this goes. Don't let it go, don't let it show. We all know just how this goes. Don't let it go, don't let it show. We all know just how this goes. You call me a flight risk, try to close my eyelids and let the sound of water fill me from the bottoms up with the sun down. Take a quick look around, I don't recognize your eyes. Vibes fall fast, hit the ground, not a single sound. Linger on, but I'm on to another round. Thought you knew I'm on the move and nowhere to be found. Thought you knew I'm on the move and nowhere to be found.
That night in the dark, I drove to Cle Elum, Washington, which is like an hour and a half away from Leavenworth, where I spent the night in a really cheap hotel.
We all know just how this goes. Don't let it go, don't let it show. We all know just how this goes. More of a hip, make a drip with the licks as it rolls off your lips and your hips go down like your expectations. All you need is patience. Why are you so anxious, anxious, anxious? More of a hip, make it drip with the licks as it rolls off your lips and your hips go down like your expectations. All you need is patience. Why are you so anxious, anxious, anxious?
let's talk about how this thing works. Before we start talking about the camera itself, let's talk about the panorama kit and what that is. If you were to open it up here, there's a bunch of different pieces inside of the panorama kit that allow you to be able to take the panorama photos. The first being the masks. Mine came with a 645 mask as well. I don't ever use that, but this is the mask, which is actually pretty important, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later. This is the take-up spool. This is the winding spool, and then a rewinder. And lastly, I think this part is actually really, really important, a penny. Before we get started, let's talk about the film mask here. Now, when I first got this kit, my first thought was, a mask? Why would I want to use a mask? That's silly. I just leave it open in there and be able to then shoot the full breadth. You have that in the sprockets. If I don't like the sprockets, then I just crop them out, no big deal. But it turns out that one thing that's really important about the sprockets is that when light comes through the camera, what happens though is if there's like a lot of direct light coming in, it kind of goes through the sprockets and then bounces off of this semi-reflective material back here on the pressure plate and then hits the backside of the film. And so you get this like ghosted effect of those sprockets on there, and they're coming back in. So it's kind of like they're being like red scaled coming back through it. Whereas if you use the mask, that masks off the sprockets, and so there's no that bounce back that comes through. It's a look. Again, I mean, if you're shooting with the sprockets, you're probably okay with things looking different and funny, but it definitely changed the way that I didn't feel as comfortable after that. Like, if I figure I'm probably gonna crop it, I use the mask. And only when I know that I don't wanna use the mask, like I actively want the sprockets and the things that could come with it, then I don't choose to not use the mask. Let's talk about loading film into here. The first thing I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna close the door here on the back side of the 6. That just prevents dust and junk from going in there. It's not super necessary, and a lot of times if I'm just like changing rules quickly, I don't bother with that, but it is something that can be kind of nice to do. So first step is going to be to take out this roll of 120. Eventually I will go back to using 120 film in this, so I just put it into the box and save it so that it's ready for the next time down the road. Then you're going to want to take the film and put it into the film holders. And so I'm just going to use this roll of New Classic Easy 400 that I had in my film fridge. And the way that this works, as you can see here, it has that up. So this goes in, and the pointy bit goes into the bottom, and it kind of like angles out. So maybe you have to go the other way. So it goes in just like so, and then you have to put that in, and so now that's in there perfectly. That's just great. And then that slides in just like so, till it clicks. Done. And you push up from the bottom, that would lock it in there. I should also note the pressure plate here. The pressure plate spins. Make sure that it is in 220 mode, 220/135 over there, just because if it's in 120 mode after 12 photos, the camera would just like release itself and expect that you'd just be flipping through to move the excess paper over to the end of it. Personally, I always have mine in 220 mode because I can have a hack that allows me to shoot 13 photos with my Mamiya 6 on a regular roll of 120, but that's a different video for a different day. Next thing would be taking that mask. So it goes right in like so, fills that open gate, and it's kind of got those little pieces just like so to make it nice and easy and fit. And then it's gonna slide across, and there's these little dots here that kind of help guide as you pull all the way across just like so. Then on this side, we're just gonna open it up here, and same deal. So you can just go in just like this, and pretty much this would be loading just like any other 35mm camera at this point. Do make sure that's in nice and close, and you would push in the button on the bottom. That would make sure it's locked in, and then just like any 35mm, you're just gonna put the tail and slide it in so that it hooks. You can kind of ratchet that just a little bit to make sure the hook is moving on there. And then before I close the door, one thing that's really important is to make sure that this metal plate comes all the way back over here, and because that just locks it all down. And then at that point, that's when I'd be able to shut the door just like so, boom, and we're done. It's probably gonna take like mine, I think it's usually 5 strokes of this to prepare it in order to be able to use. I'm not gonna actually use this film right now, so I don't wanna do this. That is definitely a bummer of this system because as much as I would, like, it just feels like there's such an enormous waste of like 5 full strokes of, like I need 1 stroke of film and it's ready. Enough film will have moved that it's going to be able to be usable. So you end up wasting a lot of the film, but there's just kind of no way around it. I've tried to like think of, could I like tape string or something onto it to kind of waste at the beginning, and so or like old unused film, like maybe, but that'd be a pain hack. So you end up being like 18 to 20 photos is about how much you can get out of a roll of 35. Let's say I've finished all of that. Normally on 120 film, it'd just be all the way onto this far side. You open the door, switch it over, ready to go. But because this has to be rewound, you definitely need to rewind it. Because this is how it's supposed to work, you don't actually have to like put this all in a dark bag or something in order to get it to rewind. So the first step you need to do is this little button here, and that's a pressure release button. So you push that, and that basically, this side here that's been like pulling, it releases the pressure, it releases any springs on there so that it'll allow itself to rewind. Then you take this rewind tab here, and all that does is that slips into the lower lug here on this side, and then you'd just like in so. One thing interesting about the Mamiya 6s is you can either have it hang on a strap this way vertically, or it can hang horizontally like this. But if you ever use the Pano kit, you probably want to go vertical because it has to like tuck into that. So it'd be kind of a pain in order to do that. But then all you do is you just screw this in just like so. It does have a tripod mount at the bottom, so theoretically, if you were doing like these all the time, you could just leave this on and then start rewinding. Now, I usually have found that you need to hold that finger on that pressure release, and then you can start rewinding here around and around and around. That said, the way that this works is that it has this little tab right in like there, and it sticks into this little divot. And that connection isn't great. Now, it might just be my camera. It might be my version of the Panorama kit, but it's not such a super strong one that sometimes it just won't catch very well. And I have found that just using a penny to do, you just reach in there and just twist and twist and twist and twist. And that's like not the greatest solution, but that works every single time. And so that's why I keep a penny in my kit. Then when it's all done, it should just be wrapped up just like normal, all of the film into the canister just like so, and you'd be ready to use it. So let's talk about using the kit here. One thing that is really awesome about this is just simply that it's a system I know really well. For photographers who listen to the Analog Talk podcast, they talk about what's your desert island camera, and for me it would be this one, which that said, taking this into a sandy desert is probably a terrible camera, but to be able to have a camera that both shoots 120 and also shoots panoramic, that's pretty perfect. And really, this camera is really small, and it isn't that much bigger than, I mean, it's bigger than my Leica, but not a ton bigger, and it's definitely not that much bigger than some of like the SLRs that I have, or even like my R6 or something like that. Like, it's pretty small, and to be able to have 2 formats in there is pretty awesome. As far as shooting this, when you look through the viewfinder, there's actually like a bunch of lines inside of it, and one of the lines inside, you can see the framing of what that panorama would look like. And so it kind of helps you guide into there of what that is. There are actually frame lines for the 3 different options that this camera is set up for, whether it be 6x6, 645, or panoramic on 35. But using this camera, it's really easy to use. It's even with a 3.5 lens, which isn't the fastest thing in the world, but for outdoor, if you're shooting with a ISO 400 film, that's probably about as fast as you can really go anyway, especially with a maximum shutter speed of 500. But that said, like, this is a slow system. Like, it's not really designed to be the crazy faster, so it does create a lot of really cool landscapes and panoramas and stuff like that. And so for me, this is just the best option for creating panoramas that like is native and is not doing like stitching and stuff. Like, this is just the best option that exists right now. So yeah, someday, hopefully I would love to own an XPAN, but until that day comes, panoramic mode with a Mamiya 6 MF is a really good alternative.